Hello YouTube and welcome back to World of Warships with Wadres, and this video is going to be a couple of matches actually from the perspective of me in the USS Saipan, and this is actually going to be from the day that the 8.0 update went live. So this was still going on while I was trying to get an idea of what I was doing with the aircraft carriers after the rework patch went through. And just, well, I had a couple of rather interesting matches while I was trying to figure all that out. The first battle is, or was, my first match in the Saipan, and I was still trying to figure out pretty much what I was doing to a point. I mean, I just graduated from the Ranger up to the Saipan, so I had some idea, but I really hadn't quite gotten into the swing of the higher tiers, I guess I could say the timing of the targeting reticle, the distances, and everything needed in response to the higher tier aircraft carriers. And in this match, it's going to show quite a good bit, because while I'm not exactly lousy, it's definitely going to be apparent just that my aim is not 100% really yet. I mean, granted, I am still going to get some damage in, I am still going to do some work, but it's kind of hit and miss, so to speak. And again, pun intended. But overall, it's just, it takes me time to figure out exactly what I need to do. And at this point in time, I was also looking at things from the perspective of some of the information that was given to me. Unfortunately, the one thing that I cannot really replicate in regards to the replays is some of the actual interface visuals. For aircraft carriers post-rework, they actually have a little indicator marking where your torpedo indicator is going to at least first show up as you approach the target. And one of the things that it took me a little bit of time to figure out was that's really your minimum marker for where you want to be. If you wish to actually do decent damage or have a decent match, you actually really kind of have to start a good bit farther back from that indicator. So at this point, I was still trying to figure that out. Now, granted, I had pretty much gotten the idea that for dive bombers, torpedo bombers, that was a reasonably good marker. And it is actually, because it's also the point at which the reticle, as long as you don't have to maneuver too much, is at its most accurate, I guess I could say. But for torpedo bombers, that's not quite the case. The torpedo bombers, that indicator is not 100% on point, and it can just cause all kinds of problems. And as you can see right here, I actually made a little bit of a mistake. I decided to go after the hood. Not only did I decide to go after the hood, I chose to go after the hood under the influence of not just its AA, but the AA of 3 other ships. Now, the hood has some phenomenal damage output from its long and medium range anti-air batteries. However, the vast majority of that still comes from its long AA flak bursts. But don't get me wrong, it's got some very heavy-duty and withering AA. And you can see that I actually made a very deliberate point of just bailing out of the hood's way as soon as I got the chance after the aircraft took off, because that was just And again, you can also see a little bit that I'm still getting used to the targeting reticle for the rocket aircraft, bombers, so on and so forth. this match, from a damage perspective, overall, wasn't too bad. But yeah, it definitely could have been better. If I had gone into this far without having gone through the Ranger or the Langley first, that would have been a just terrible match. But because this was my first match in the Saipan, after upgrading from the Ranger, I had a little bit of experience working with the aircraft, but I really hadn't developed a lot of the skills again yet. It was definitely a major learning curve. And the other thing was I was also having to kind of learn how to deal with the Tier 10 aircraft because, again, this was also my setup for working for the Midway, or with the Midway, which, again, is the same aircraft, basically. So it was setting me up for that at the lower tier. And, well, it definitely did a good job, though there were a couple of instances in the matches where it was just the matchups, the lineups, basically everything that I was dropped into really couldn't have gone too much worse. And again, still getting used to the bombing reticle, as you can see there. Just, I completely misjudged the actual attack point dive bombing in the hood. But see, this is one of the other things that I have to mention in regard to the hood's AA, is that, yeah, she's got phenomenal AA, but again, earlier the mistake that I had made also was that she had a cluster of other ships around her. And in this case, she's isolated, and while she has good AA, at least I've got a better chance of even just getting more than one strike in on her now, as opposed to previously where, yeah, I really didn't have much of a chance. And overall, just trying to do what damage I can, because this match has also gone downhill very quickly. This was one of those cases where it was pretty obvious that the other aircraft carrier in the match was also still just learning what was going on, and not really on point with his or her attack runs either. So, yeah, this match went down hard and fast. I mean, at this point you can also see that I'm just doing a lot more steady drop and runs, just trying to get in as much damage as I possibly can in a short amount of time, because we have 4 enemy ships that have, I mean, I'm in view of them, the friendly is in view of them, and there's just no way in hell either of us are going to be getting out of here alive if we don't do at least something quickly. And, well, I obviously get finished off here very, very shortly, with the result that this set of dive bombers is my last one, and while I do make it count, unfortunately it's not enough. And the other thing you can see at this point is that where previously in the Ranger the AI wasn't quite so concerning, yeah, now I'm actually having to worry about the AA on a dramatic level, and my aircraft are just taking a beating because I haven't really quite gotten the hang of AA dodging just yet. And yeah, that was a loss. Our Haida, he was, okay. Retask. He was able to finish off the enemy battleship, but for whatever reason, he had the enemy Haida behind him, shooting at him, and I mean, I was watching this at the end of the replay, and he had the enemy Haida shooting at him, but he wasn't shooting back for whatever reason. I mean, okay, I suppose maybe he'd resigned himself to the fact that maybe we lost, but seriously, at least try, dude. Don't just flat out give up. I mean, you don't know if it was going to be a flat out loss at that point or not. I mean, granted, I don't know if he had smoke either, but still, just maybe there could have been at least a chance to save the match, right? But anyway, whatever. Overall, it was from my perspective as a damage match, it was okay. From the team's perspective, it was just horrible. Because, again, we lost a co-op match because nobody had really any idea what was going on or what they were doing as far as the two aircraft carriers in the match, on top of the fact that they were replaced by two battleships of equal tier that, well, at that point, that firepower just outclasses two thoroughly unskilled and uninitiated aircraft carriers, basically. So it had some dramatic ramifications regarding the actual outcome of that match. Now, the second match here, however, should show a dramatic difference, at least I would hope, because this was actually the last match I had in the Saipan prior to upgrading to the Midway. And, I mean, you can already see that my skills are dramatically changing. I mean, I'm already making a much more of an effort, at least initially, to avoid the AA. My attack runs, maybe not exactly the most invested yet, but they will be. And, I mean, I'm also making sure that I'm not steering into enemy AA to actually turn around and go after this destroyer. And, well, yeah, my targeting wasn't exactly 100% yet, but at the same time, I also didn't exactly have an incredible amount of notice in regards to where that destroyer was actually going to show up. This shot, however, yeah, no, still a miss. Okay. Yeah, it wasn't... This was a better match than the previous one, but in this one, the damage was not quite so great either. I was a little bit more cautious in my regards to my aircraft use by this point. My AA dodging again was at least a little bit better, but I was also trying to make sure that I had the time, the distance, the placement to actually invest in actually getting decent strikes in, as opposed to the previous match where I was investing, but I was also putting my aircraft into situations where I just wasn't dodging the AA effectively enough, and it was definitely taking its toll. One of the other, I guess, showcases in how much more confident I was with the controls is just, you can kind of see what I'm doing with my control scheme a little bit. First off, I was zigzagging a little bit more coming into the AA bursts, but also, while that I didn't exactly hit, I was at least comfortable enough with my reticle at this point where I felt a little bit more confident trying to actually dive bomb a destroyer. Now, granted, pulling out and trying to get out of the cruiser's AA bubble, yeah, I just kind of lost that squadron. But based on the flak color, that cruiser had also utilized DFAA. So at that point, it was really a moot point as to whether or not I was going to be getting out of there unscathed in the first place, let alone actually recover anything at all. Now, this match at first also did kind of seem to be going downhill very quickly as well, but this was also one of those situations where, for the first time, I had actually ended up being the only CV in the match, which changed things up dramatically. We didn't have two aircraft carriers going for targets and still kind of fudging everything. But there was also the fact that the friendly team was because they had one more battleship instead of aircraft carrier, they were more effective at trying to handle the enemy ships also. So it was a little bit less problematic in those regards, I guess would be the way of putting it. Now, unfortunately, I am still kind of scrubbing things just a little bit. In fact, that shot probably wasn't... If that ship had been moving at proper speed or any slower, that shot would not have worked out. And again, at this point, I was still... Even at this point, I was still kind of working out my lead and whatever, and yeah. These torpedoes were a little bit faster than I thought they were. Whereas previously I had been kind of underestimating my lead. At that point I actually overestimated my lead and I almost missed because I overshot. So yeah, it was still kind of hit and miss in regards to everything, but I was definitely doing better. And forgive me, I almost fell out of my chair here. Now, at this point in the match, you'll notice that there are 2 battleships left on the enemy team, and I also have a friendly Bismarck who is also left over, I believe. And, I mean, overall, it's not looking too good. I mean, I've got the 1 friendly against 2, and they're way across the map. I pretty much realized that at this point, unless the friendly was really, really lucky, he probably was not coming out of this match intact, so to speak. So, at this point, I'm really just kind of trying to do everything that I can against the enemy ships before they can actually get an opportunity to go after him and do substantial damage to him. I'm also trying to get myself into a position where I can actually be closer to provide support and minimize the amount of time spent in transit to assist him without putting my own ship at risk too much. And unfortunately, it's just not going to work out. The downside about being in place against Bismarcks is they are relatively quick ships, and I didn't realize at this point that I was only running at 3/4 throttle. I kind of blamed the reliance on autopilot for that a little bit as far as maneuvering my aircraft carrier. But the other thing is I was also trying to get myself into a position to cap C just in case one of them came over my way towards B, or C, instead of going over towards A. But instead, they both pursued A, which just made the efforts of my friendly over in A that much more, I guess, threatened. He had no means of countering 2 battleships, and I was only really able to provide support at long range at intervals as opposed to if I had been, say, a battleship or a cruiser. But the other catch here being that if I had been in battleship or cruiser, I also would have been vulnerable and fully exposed to the enemy battleships trying to chase them down and assist him. So it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other in its own right. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing that says it was horrible. And you'll also notice that I definitely did not want to torpedo the friendly here, which is why I just did not carry out the attack in that instance. But at the same time, there was nothing to actually prevent the enemy from doing anything to finish him off either. The only thing I can really do is contribute to finishing off this other battleship, which is not too close, and I only got 1 torpedo hit. because I did not have an incredible amount of time invested in the attack, which unfortunately condemned the friendly to his death, because I only have one more torpedo run, and while it is on the lower ship, he's not exactly doing too healthy over here. So, yeah. And now I'm back to the ship.
Our team has taken the lead.
Oh, it was a friendly bot, Richelieu. But still, it was literally by the skin of his teeth that he was able to finish off one of the enemy battleships. He certainly does not survive the other. Now, one of the things that I will say that I've noticed that I am liking about the Saipan Tier 10 aircraft carriers, at least for the US, and that is their alternative attack aircraft rocket plane builds. The torpedoes, that's one thing. The dive bombers, or HE, that's really not changing up too terribly much. Forgive the bird in the background. But the rocket planes are impressive in one regard. They have two different loadouts for the rocket planes. They have one which is kind of like a high quantity rocket with low penetration, but there are numerous rockets in the payload. And I have kind of noted that that is good for going after destroyers or setting a large number of fires on larger ships. But the other loadout is the same aircraft with what are referred to as the tiny Tim rockets. And damn, they are, granted, a destroyer that actually takes a decent hit from the tiny Tim rockets will definitely take a good chunk of damage, don't get me wrong. But if you hit a capital ship with these rockets for a single attack run can do like 8,000, 7,000, 6,000 damage in a single run, whereas the other rockets, the regular high quantity, low penetration rockets, may catch a couple of fires, but they'll only do a couple of thousand damage at best. So I've actually had a decent amount of fun hunting capital ships with the Saipan's heavier rocket aircraft instead of actually going after destroyers. And I have actually enjoyed doing so because it means that they are larger ships that are no longer, that are having to worry more about my aircraft than destroyers are. And that leaves my friendlies to worry more about the destroyers, the ships that are easier to kill as long as they're spotted, rather than having to chip away battleships for their entire health pool because the aircraft carrier isn't really putting a whole lot of effort into them. Instead, I'll go after the larger ships with rockets, with bombs, with torpedoes. Why? Because I have the capability, and I know that I have the ability to just completely finish them off. And I can do it in maybe not great amounts of time, but decent amounts of time. And that's just something that I've picked up over time of working with the aircraft carriers after the rework. I did try using the lighter rocket payload on the Midway once or twice. And I also went with the RPF build, too. And I was underwhelmed by it. Now, granted, this is in co-op. The bots don't care about whether or not they're detected. They just keep charging in regardless, and that makes them a little bit predictable and easy to hit, I guess, in that regard. But the main thing is, they just don't care. Whereas in a actual random match, you may find it differently. you'll have a destroyer who is actively running away and hiding instead of ending up on detection for the vast majority of the match. And just overall, I guess it's one of those your mileage may vary things, but I personally do not see an incredible amount of use in having RPF on an aircraft carrier, or for that matter, the low damage, low penetration, high quantity rockets, unless you're looking for setting a large number of fires. As far as the HE versus AP, I've successfully pulled off 18,000 damage with Midway air bomb strikes. So that's something else to consider, is how much damage are they doing? Now, granted, they're HE, not AP, you're not citadeling everything, so that is also damage that can be healed back. But also in that regard, more damage farming, provided you actually get in successful strikes, and that's the other thing. The AP damage, it's a little bit harder to mitigate, whereas the HE dive bombs, you can recover virtually all of that as long as you have the capability. So yeah, it's one of those mixed bag sort of things. Again, your mileage may vary depending on your experience, what you've played with, your preferred battle mode, so on and so forth, and just what other people are doing around you. Anyway, on that note, I suppose at that I will let everybody go. If you have enjoyed the video, please do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to catch you all again next time. Have a good one, and happy hunting out there.